together by combining historical, climate, food, and economic data so you can make informed decisions as we shift into a new era. Here's what was, this is what's coming. Our world is never going back to 2019, so what will the new era look like? And most importantly, what is immediate that will affect the pocketbook and the outlook into next year so we can all get ready? Thank you for joining. I'm your host, David DuByne.
Right along here with Ransom Godwin every Thursday night, 10 p.m. to midnight, Revolution Radio, streaming to 12 different platforms right now. Thank you, Brighteon.com, for letting us stream from the 10 o'clock to the 12 o'clock hour. Vigilante TV as well. Rumble going live, and also on the Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast, YouTube channel, and Ransom has Twitter and Facebook as well. So we're trying to cover a full gamut so you can have the conversation with others, because this is an integral, very important time to be talking with other people. I don't care what they used to believe before 2 weeks ago or last week with the CrowdStrike. You know, our computers went down. Food ordering is disrupted. It seems Delta Airlines is having trouble finding their decryption keys, and that's the reason they're not back online yet, because they can't manually do the update because they don't have the decryption keys to actually unlock the server, plural, that they're running. This is why Delta remains down so longer than others. So if we haven't seen the events, you know, a lot of people have woken up instantly. The fuzz has disappeared into clarity, and whatever side of the aisle you are on, whatever side of the city you come from, people in unison are seeing the same thing, that, you know what, the world we thought the way it was just a couple of weeks ago is not the way it really is. And a lot of people are asking questions and want to talk because they're confused and they're scared, and they're questioning their own belief systems, and the very foundations of their reality have just shattered over the last couple of weeks. So it's a great time to reach out to people. It's an amazing time to have conversations about things that you never thought you could talk with other people about. You know, we've got these overlapping crisis periods, and we could talk about it just in the United States, which we're going to tonight. You know, it just seems like cascade after cascade, step after step after, you know, it's like rolling like a slinky downhill, just the next on top of the next. It's like a repeating collapse cycle begins again, but perhaps that's exactly what it is. And this is the thing I want to focus on tonight. The celestial alignments and the celestial events that are occurring right now are truly, you know, magnificent, and only come in very long duration cycles right now. If there's going to be the true catalyst for the reason that the world would change, governments understand they couldn't override a powerful, natural, heavy cycle. So what would they do? They would just try to maintain power, make sure they can maintain, you know, continuity of government enough to come out on the backside of it. But as we get a quick timeline, October of this year, 2024, the four gas giants will be squaring in the outer solar system. And the last time we saw this square was 79 AD. Read into that what you will. It's a cycle of planetary geometry, not alignments, but geometry. A squaring, not a line of planets, but a square that have different interlooping magnetic fields. And shall that interfere with our Earth's magnetic field? As the sun tries to interact with that more, it's going to come straight through the Earth here. October of 2024. So we're going to have some sort of magnetic field anomaly. Maybe that's why people are behaving strangely. Not sure. But then we come into April of 2025. Now the Earth's going to spin around the sun. And because all those gas giants and every single planetary body in our entire solar system is behind us, including the sun, there's nothing in front of us. It's the most open the entire solar system can be in 400 years. And the Earth just sits out there by itself with everything gravitationally tugging straight into the front of our planet here before it gets to the sun, and then Jupiter, and then Saturn. All those gravitational bodies are making like a pincer arrow. April of 2025 will be the maximum intensity and duration of that. So look at all the scatter waving happening right now. Do you think these could be related? That's kind of where... And can it be saved? Can it be salvaged? Can anything on this planet in its current form move through the transition without being affected. I guess I'll premise it that way. Ransom, thanks for joining tonight.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, I did a show with Diamond the other day, and we were talking about the magnetic reversal, and how it affected Earth 42,000 years ago. Like we know what some weird magnetic, environments look like for people on the Earth. That's most doubtedly not just when Neanderthal man went extinct, but probably all of the other species that aren't part of our current core species of, we're a hybrid species now, but at one time we weren't the only players on the block, but they all disappeared the last time the magnetic field not only reversed, but kind of stayed in a limbo for quite some time. And reading the paper that we were talking about, it's a peer review paper, and it was talking about, hell on Earth, basically. I mean, fires, lightning, all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
When is this going to be due, or when is this magnetic field anomaly, or is it just a cycle? And when was the last one that you all were talking about?
Well, we were talking about specifically the 42,000 one, but we know that's what's going on right now. So it's a duplicate of what happened then. It's just how far are we in it? The whole thing takes
42,000 years ago. I want to get that straight. 42,000 years ago.
That's right. That's when all of the other humans blinked out of existence, except for us, for some reason. There could have been many reasons, but the point being, the conditions on Earth. Could today's people deal with it like the hardy people that were surviving it at the time? And I don't think the answer is yes. I mean, we're talking about bolts of lightning all the time, all over the place, because there would literally be nothing shielding us down here on the planet from cosmic rays and solar radiation. I mean, little to nothing, except for the atmosphere. So, like, you might get away with it on a cloudy, really heavily stormy, cloudy day getting around, but the rest of the time, you would fry. You're going to fry. But not just that. How would a technological civilization endure something like that? The answer probably is not for a while. And this event takes about 800 years to go through the whole thing.
They couldn't survive the present technology we have now, but if there was a different type of tech running on the Earth's magnetic field, you would also wonder how that would be affected. But either of them, I'm going to say this one right now, this one, absolutely no way. But the one prior running on magnetic field motors, how would that also, so we got both being affected, but at different levels and intensity of being affected.
Right. But as far as like circuits and wires and, massive cities that are just basically a rat's nest of wires interconnected that would all light up and catch on fire every so often, every time we got a little bit of solar radiation. What's weird about it is we know we're a couple hundred years into the event, right? So if the whole event takes 800 years total, we're in the middle of it, and at any time could, experience the very bad part of it, which is probably when everybody went extinct. And we know, like, the Neanderthal genes that passed on down to us were that of those that could handle ultraviolet radiation, or at least for the most part. I recently did a genetic test and found that I actually have those genes passed down to me by Neanderthal that gives me a darker than normal skin tone. But it also, so everybody's got different genes, but evidently some people had to hide in caves. I mean, literally, there's no other, option that they would have had. They would have had to had real shelter and be nocturnal animals for some period of time. And we're talking hundreds of years. And then if that did happen, you would bet that people would start paying attention to the precession of the equinox, wondering, if that's connected, because they did know that there was a cycle. I don't know at which point, but my theory is if you know 26,000 years, then you have to know 52,000 years. Otherwise, you wouldn't know that it repeated, right? So that's the frame of time that we're talking about since these conditions happened. But my point being, if this event is, 800 years long total, and we know that the magnetic fields have been drifting for several hundred years now, and that they're increasing in speed as far as where they're, moving away from the actual locale of the North Pole, like the physical North Pole. They're moving far away, like so is the South. And when do we get in that condition? And what is the trigger? So this is what I want to circle around to what you're talking about the planets. If there was a solar magnetic event on top of whatever the sun is already doing and whatever the Earth is doing, you know that's all interconnected. So what are we talking about? Like, what kind of trigger would actually trigger that snap and flip? So those of you that are believing, the crust is going to move, that's not what we're talking about. Just the magnetic field itself flipping and basically collapsing for all intents and purposes for maybe even a couple hundred years. And so you could tell that our current form of agriculture, our current form of technology, all of that would be gone. I mean, literally just bye. It would be gone for a couple hundred years. The question is could we survive that event? And what are the indicators that maybe we're not the only ones that are thinking about it? Like, for example, think tanks, continuity of government, etc. That they've read these papers. They know all of this stuff happens. So they have some kind of plan to deal with it. And what would that be? Well, it's the same literal plan as the ancients did, most likely, is they went in caves, and so are the people that are, doing it right now. And, not to be a conspiracy theorist, but the richest of richest people and the elites of governments, royalty, etc., have all been buying bunkers and stuff in like New Zealand and places like that in the southern hemisphere. For what reason, I don't know. Is it because, they're just going to decide, if things are going to do that, you might as well have your little nuclear war or conventional war before it's impossible to complete. Because what would the powers of the world do with no magnetic field? I mean, basically all of their toys, devices and all that are going to be trashed. So they have to have a backup plan. And I think that's where, some of these theories about the aircraft that are being flown around that are probably anti-gravitic and kind of gets into what you're talking about. It's a totally different technology that is based on magnetics and the magnetic field. So you could see that if you did have something like that, there is no doubt you would have the upper hand, for several centuries in theory. But we do know this event is happening. So it's not a question is if it is, or, it's how long will it take? Will there be an actual collapse of the magnetic field for some time? And what does that mean for life on Earth, and especially us, our life?
Well, like it is now, things are going to be changing at all times. And that's something to think about, because if the magnetic field even goes on a heavy excursion, meaning it moves, and they used to have a data set online. It was called SWARM, SWARM. You could still probably find some of the older graphics that are online, but they took that down about 4 years ago, just before COVID. They took it offline. And that public information, like 2018 or so, it used to be public, everything they published about magnetic field changes, but they saw the South Atlantic anomaly, the biggest one on the planet, where the magnetic field is behaving strange and becoming very, very, very weakened. And that is to the east of Peru and Chile. Or I should just say go out off of Brazil and further south in part of South America. That whole area down there. And then once they got such a low magnetic field reading, they quit publishing the data. Because what if there's other breakthrough spots? So these magnetic fields loop and they're connected in toroid fields. It's not like one line directly to another. They're in looping current. You have to think about it as a series of loops coming in and folding in on themselves, where they never disconnect, but they have that circular folding in shape. This is why the magnetic field stays, because it's a continuous loop. Now, if this were to be disturbed in any way, shape, or form, like we've seen the North Pole really wandering around 120 miles. I think the greatest amount of movement was 120 miles several 5-6 years ago, and then it's kind of slowed down to 60 miles a year moving. So you have to think 60 miles is 1 degree of latitude. So birds are in the wrong place, fish migrations, whale migrations, any kind of magnetically navigating bird, insect, animal species, whatever it is, amphibian, they would be ending up in the wrong place. And we're seeing a lot of this. So I would ask the question, like, why did they stop publishing the swarm data? And also, very luckily, that huge magnetic anomaly is in the middle of the ocean. It's not over a landmass. I'm very curious if it was over a large amount of cities, like over Europe, for example, how would that disrupt the regular electrical system in the localized area? Because you're just very lucky. Now, what happens if it's breaking through somewhere else and it was quantifiable, and that's why they took swarm down, because they could tell you where the next breakthrough or lowering of the magnetic field, which, you take that thing straight up, and it's also related with the electrical connection out to the ionosphere, so it started to dip in. So what if you knew where the next point was going to be that was going to have the largest magnetic field declines? Would you want that on the public so people like Ransom and myself can talk about that and show you exactly where it is over which cities? And then suddenly, magically, all these problems evolve in these same cities or same areas where their telecommunications don't work, their electrical systems don't work. And you're pointing a direct correlation of lowered magnetic field is responsible for the malfunction of our current system built in a different magnetic field. So that's the thing I'm trying to explain about these planets that are squaring. Different magnetic fields are forming. So it's like layers of a cake. Our present system was, let's say, put into a strawberry layer. But if you had these magnetic anomalies that are focal points on Earth somewhere, 100 square miles or something like this, 1,000 square miles, whatever under there would have a new magnetic frequency, would be operating in a different magnetic field, like a vanilla layer. So that strawberry and vanilla layer would not mix. And if they were trying to intermix and intercept, then there would be a scatter pattern in that, a disruption, because it wouldn't be cleanly meeting from one to the next. The magnetic field's different, so the machines are going to operate differently. The motors are going to operate differently. Everything would operate differently based on a change in the magnetic field on those same motors and computers and windmills and whatever else it is. I think that's one reason that they didn't want you to see what this is. This is localized areas now, but imagine if it spreads to the entire planet. That would be something that nobody would want you to see, because once you can measure the rate of decline, you can get a pretty good idea of how fast government timelines need to keep lockstep with that magnetic field change. And again, if you could get it regionally and localized, then you could also go, well, look how much this government's changing under here, this continental, this unified body, this group of countries. Look how fast they're changing right under the new magnetic field. Because they would have to, out of necessity, because they would know that once it sets in, it's probably not going to bounce back out again until the entire planet does what you're talking about, with different magnetic orientation from north-south until that cycle completes itself. These little punch-through spots are going to continue to be like the anchors for the change. Because one thing I've noticed is that South Atlantic anomaly, before, I wouldn't say it was a pinprick, but it was small. You could definitely see the concentric circles coming out in blue, and it wasn't all that. But over the last 10 or 12 years, that thing has gotten just so much larger and so much more intense in terms of the lowering of the magnetic field in those areas. So if you were going to talk about electrogravitics and different types of, I'm wondering in these different magnetic spots on the planet, if electrogravitics craft would operate faster or, have superior usage in these different types of lower magnetic fields. Because a lot of times, you see the UFOs coming out of the Bermuda Triangle, et cetera. In Asia, there's also one up near Japan. It's a similar thing. It's called the Devil's Triangle. Same thing, but magnetic anomalies are a thing in both spots. So if you start to think about that, well, what if that South Atlantic magnetic anomaly is just one giant Bermuda Triangle of magnetic strangeness? I am sure ships do not want to sail in there. We are just very lucky that it's not over land. But again, how much more is it intensified or actually decreased? When I say intensity, I'm talking about taking a higher number going to a lower number, because the lower you go, the more disturbed and the less magnetic field is there. So if you're going from 300 to 0, something along these lines. How far does it go down, or how far have we gone down? And really, when does it reach through the planet and connect to the other side. That's the whole, we got this surface anomaly map going on. But magnetism isn't like that. It doesn't get stopped by rocks. I mean, within reason. I mean, it might hit a vein of something, or it might go around others that don't carry current in the crust. But that magnetic field connecting, looping toroid current could go through the center of the Earth easily. It could blast right through the core and then pop out somewhere on the other side. And that itself would be a looping field, just like you see on the sun. You get all those interconnected magnetic field lines. And then some of those break off and, they get magnetically twisted, and boom, that's when we get our CME. When those two separate magnetic fields start to intermix on themselves. And once they get all twisted up, and then they are highly energized because the current's flowing in just different discombobulated directions on those magnetic field lines. So once they twist up, they got to release it, and boosh, they come off as a CME, which we've had a bunch of X flares recently. So my thing would be the sun is behaving a little bit differently. Now, what happens on our Earth here? We got the South Atlantic anomaly. What if it pops out over Indonesia, off of Indonesia, to the west, south of Sumatra? And that starts looping in on a current on itself as its own new field line of disturbance within our own magnetic field, like it's coming into its own mini field inside this larger field. I think that's what they're really terrified of, is allowing you to know where the breakthrough spots are and how they're intensifying. If we could see these maps on how much more intense it's getting in each spot, because you can almost forecast where it's going because they're directional. Usually they stay in a certain direction for 5 or 10 years. Like when the northern magnetic field, North Pole, not physical, but North Pole, was moving toward Kamchatka in Russia, it always kept trekking the same direction for about 12 years or more. It just kept clipping that way. So you could expect the same thing in the near term. Now, I'm not talking long term, 20, 30, 40 years, but within 2 to 5 years, you could nail that exactly where the trajectory is going toward, and the disruptions of the magnetic field, and the disruptions literally in the pipes that are not insulated, or there's just a million things that could go wrong with the infrastructure if it's on a highly electrified new magnetic field looping current on the planet. Like, that is very, I think that's what you and Diamond were talking about. So I'm going to stop there.
Yeah, it's kind of like one of the topics you talk about. Like, you have the ozone hole that keeps popping up near that disturbance, right? It's completely based on how good the magnetic field is. I sent you a couple papers that are talking about, at that time period, how the ozone layer was completely stripped. So we know people were just getting cancer. They were getting fried. Things that were, vulnerable to ultraviolet radiation were just not having a good time on Earth. So, yeah, when you put that into a now context, anytime the sun would burp out a solar flare, even if it's small, all of our electronics would be junk. So, it kind of makes you wonder why some of the tech has gone down the path it's gone. Like, why are we putting up a bunch of low Earth orbiting satellites? And I think the answer to that is they're basically throwaways. They're throwaways because they know they can put them up fast and efficient now. So it's not like, Elon Musk basically proved that within a short amount of time, only a year or so. If you had the stuff, you have a new network up. You have a new network floating around the Earth anytime it repairs or the conditions are okay. You're in charge. He who has the satellites, my friend. No, it seems like it is going exactly there. I think there's some agreement in the scientific community that we might be in a duplicate scenario than that of the 142,000 years ago, which an 800-year period totally and fundamentally changed Earth as it was, like forever. So it never went back to the way that was. And unfortunately for, those different kinds of humans running around the planet, that was their doomsday. That was their apocalypse, and that was the end of times for them. Somehow humans made it through, but here we are with a totally, fabricated dissimulation of fake reality. And no one, not one person probably other than some nerds, like me, even pay attention to stuff like this. And the question is why don't governments prepare the public for the actual possibilities of reality and not the dissimulation that they want them to live in. And I think the answer for that is, well, they're hoping that one of many of these loops overlap. And I think that's what they think is happening right now, that many different loops are overlapping right now, putting them in the perfect position to redesign the world. And before you do that, we have to go through the what they call it, the suffering struggle, or the I forgot how they put it. We have to have our struggle session, right? We have to have our public and worldwide struggle session to tear down everything old, so we can have something new in the new view of the controllers. And what they're doing publicly kind of shows that. I mean, tonight's title there is: Our Republic Fallen, or can we still save it? And I think we can still save it because we're just at the very beginning of the hardball game to get rid of us. And how are we going to avoid that? And I know that if politics goes in a certain direction, prices are going to go up. If politics goes in the other direction, other prices are going to go up, but they're actually going to shut down any semblance of business here. So hopefully, we don't have a total dissimulation, and our country goes in building things again, basically, of having factories here. But not just that. See, they're always talking on TV, we're going to bring American jobs here, but it's a Chinese company. So the Chinese are going to be making money, and then we're going to be buying their products. And we have to move away from that entire idea. We have to go back to, we produce every single thing that we need here. And if the country won't do it as a whole, your state needs to try to do it. And if your state doesn't do it, then you need to try to figure that out in your local area. Otherwise, we're kind of screwed. And how can you live other than like the Amish if the network fails? And it seems like they're preparing us for that. We had nonstop predictive programming about cyber attacks. I brought that up several times, that we should, expect some major cyber attacks, only because they keep telling us that we're going to have those cyber attacks. And speaking, maybe this is a little woo-woo, but if you pay attention to what the militaries are doing, they want to take control of both poles. Now, I wonder why they would want to do that in terms of, if there was a magnetic field collapse, how could your country survive? Well, I was thinking that militarily, you would have to have bunkers. You would have to have a seafaring navy that mostly does everything underwater, right? And you would have to have massive stockpiles of food to get you through the worst part of it until, the magnetic field starts to repair itself or come back or flip back to normal, which they know it'll do. The question is just, how long does that take? Are we in the period that's going to get crazy, or is that still being pushed off where they think it's another 50 years? Because it seems like that's what it is, but they want to be ready when it happens, to have every duck in a row, every technology in place, every system ready, everything beta tested, and all of the flaws run out. And it's just like the idea of, at one time, every government in the world was just a group of people in a building. They probably didn't number more than 100, really. Now you look at the monstrosities of government of today, and just imagine how many federal employees there are in just our country, and then combine the entire world's population and separate all of the government workers away from, just the regular populace. And you'll see how many people are actually intentionally or unintentionally, directly or indirectly, working for a global reset. And where I was going with that is, here's just something to back up what I'm talking about. Pentagon announces new Arctic strategy as region becomes more contested. Now, why is it contested? Why are they contesting the poles? And are we about to see the same thing in Antarctica as well? Because, there's a lot of sensitive things that we've put down there. There's some weird treaties. There's even theories of alternative histories about what's going on there. I mean, you name it. Most of the news that I'm getting now is easily and verifiably debunkable. So it's like they have been given the go-ahead to just lie, distract, entertain, demoralize, and completely crumble the fabric of societies around the world, not just in America. I mean, Really, if you compare what you've been watching the last couple days, because we had a visitor from out of town, it looks exactly like France and other places that are pretty much, I know people are trying to say that they're not gone, but they look gone if you compare them to 2010. If you take every European major city that was a tourist attraction and was trying to showcase the culture and history of that country, and you show those pictures today, you won't recognize it. It's not. It doesn't look the same. It's totally either destroyed, graffitied, or being occupied.
Yeah, that's one thing. They're graffiti. And it doesn't matter what culture you're from or which colors you use or which symbols or whatever it is. I went to so many beautiful places, especially in Croatia, but they have a lot of graffiti on some of the most beautiful buildings. You're walking down some of these boulevards and you're like, man, this is the most stunning. This blows anything that, 1930s New York City out of the water in modern day. It's like you're really walking through time capsule. But then walking down the sides of the street, there's graffiti on every other building, even on the ones that have ornate stone and are very, very unusual, that are definitely hundreds of years old. People are spray painting all over the place, everywhere, and it really detracts from the beauty of what could be, us living what would be considered in opulence, just in an everyday living environment. But the graffiti's got to come in and ruin that. The brain's going to process like that wealthiness in your mind of where you live with no graffiti, and everything is just incredible 200-year-old buildings down, tree-lined streets. Or you walk in the same thing and everything's covered in graffiti. Even the trains that come by are the trams in town in Zagreb. Graffiti is, and you got to wonder who is allowing such graffiti to be put in these places, because and then you go to Italy and there's hardly any. You got to wonder why you just go from one country like Croatia over to Italy, and it's just hugely night and day difference of how much graffiti is there. And that's one thing I noticed right away is like, damn, nobody is really graffitiing over here. But then you look at in Washington, where graffiti's being sprayed too. Like for me, I was looking at some pictures the last couple of days going, if they're allowed to get up there and graffiti inside the hallows of what you would consider architecture and bedrock of the nation itself, literally. Like to allow that to be spray painted, that means that that's no different than putting a flag up and declaring victory and we claim this spot. Like if you can't hold a little tiny piece of ground and be like, no graffiti here, then you have literally lost your nation. That has been a completely overwhelmed of invading forces, and it is completely inundated to the point that they are now in control, not the previous controllers. And I'm wondering at the end of the Roman days, if people went in there and were graffitiing when they saw the collapse and the coinage being debased and not as much silver, and all the endless wars and the crop shortages and everything, say circa 300 AD. Like when people were really living that and seeing that total collapse of the Roman Empire, really, that's very at its last end days, where people also doing graffiti, but in their own way with ochres and different kind of plant-based inks, etc., and colors. And I wonder, if there was a lot of graffiti, because that's kind of at the end of it. If you can't control at least the beauty of the city and convince people enough, it's not about controlling it. It's about convincing it that, hey, we all live in this most immaculate, beautiful place, and it's one of the gems of the planet. Please keep it clean and don't spray paint it. Like if the whole society is resonating with that, yeah, you don't have to enforce anything. But then when it rolls over on the point where you're coming up again in Washington, that's and then in the center of the center, and some of the most sacred of places that are literally the bedrock of the beginnings, are all covered in all kind of graffiti and sayings and different colored spray paints and things. And I'm thinking they couldn't even control that 1 square foot of space. That is total surrender at that point. You just take a look back through these chapters of history here and how civil societies themselves, when they come to some point of disagreement and then non-repairability is probably the best way to look at it. What cycle is this on also? Because you can go across the planet, and Strauss and Howe wrote that fourth turning for a reason. And then you can start to look at the famines and the crop destruction and the civilization resets, and that they seem to be on a cycle. 400 years is a good medium length duration cycle. Like from that, you can predict crop yield outcomes, atmospheric flows, the disruption in that and the cloud cells and the jet streams, Earth's magnetic field, and it's continuing to weaken like Ransom was talking about earlier. But it's more like the freedoms evaporate as these different magnetic field and solar system wide changes intensify. It seems like there's some sort of formula here. And I'll say that again. Freedoms evaporate based on the intensification of or diminishment of the magnetic field on a more solar system wide basis, where we start to see the effects on Earth. And it must be that rollover kind of check the box finally for all the elites across the planet that, yep, we finally rolled into this one and the amplification is clear enough to see. And this is the signal we've been looking for the last 400 years or 2,000 years. And it's here again. So, yep, it's time to get ready. And, yep, this is the signal. We've come over the point now where the extremes are just so ridiculous on the planet. I'm trying to do a video tonight. It'll be out. I auto uploaded it. It should be out in about 20 minutes up on YouTube. But China had the most massive floods they've had since records began. Now, you could talk about the location along the Yangtze River all the way up to the Himalayan mountains records, or you could talk about down where Nanjing was, or how old Beijing is, or how old, some of the older capitals, Chengdu or Xi'an, or I should say Shenyang, excuse me. Like some of these older capitals where they were. But if you just look at Chinese history in the modern time, they had the most massive record floods they've ever had, ever. Now, the entire stage of all the rivers controlling dams down to the Three Gorges Dam got so overwhelmed that everything was emergency overflow. All spillways were open, and water was still coming in at a rate that they're baffled how none of the dams collapsed from so much water so quickly. That had been let out and is flooding all of the crop regions in central area near the Yangtze River. And Wuhan is one of those cities that's on that river. But even with all that incredible floods, now there's two cyclones that are going to converge over that same exact area in the next 3 days. So what was already record floods is going to have two more typhoons, hurricanes, cyclones on top of that record floods. And you know how much those storms bring in anyway. And I'm like, damn, somebody's steering these things directly in there, because you got two storms converging and they're meeting kind of like an arrowhead right over the main crop growing region. That'd be like our Midwest in America, directly there to flood on top of double flooded. And then the derecho that ripped through America 500 miles long, and it moved over for 100 miles, it moved. But our corn was chest high and 105 mile an hour winds. It is now flat. So in Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana, where the storm started, it moved. It was 500 miles long, and then it moved forward 100 miles. So that whole rectangle, 500 miles long and 100 miles wide, is pretty much as flattened crops, corn, i.e., or sorghum. So you have to think about how many millions of hectares or millions of acres. Excuse me, I was talking British English. So how many acres is that? Millions of acres. And these storms just keep getting more intense and more intense. So obviously we've reached some kind of crescendo point where the intensification is now noticeable not only for the elite, but it's noticeable for every single human on this planet. That whatever excuse was given to them to explain away the changes up to a point is no longer valid. Even those explanations to explain to them why everything was changing in the environment around them, that was believable to a point. Now the amplification and the ramp up of something 10x, 20 times larger than anything before, doubling of speeds, tripling of rainfalls, this only goes to a point where you can go, that's that gas in the sky. It's happening too quickly. and it's too intense. So that original excuse is great to deflect everybody for many a year. But now we're into the point now where everybody can see through the illusion. So these last 2 weeks have been an absolute consciousness ripper in terms of people waking up to that what most of, or not, if not all, or a majority or something of the programming that was there before has just been disrupted. But see, governments would understand this also. So now notice how fast things are going to move in terms of change. And I say again, freedom is going to evaporate more and more quickly depending on how much more and intense these weather events become, where people start to question the narratives given for all the weather changes that are here. At that point, they've totally lost pretty much all control of what was built in over the last 50 years of you to believe how this reality works is being shattered right now. Now you need to control that and still stay in power. Now tell me what your next move on the board's going to be. Ransom. I'll leave it there.
I don't know, man. It's hard for me to believe anything they say because, like, I was reading an article, where is it? I think I saved it here, where it's talking about how, super hot it is. Yeah, here it is. Apocalyptic 150-degree heat dome smashes temperatures, records, and world bakes. And then I look at it, right, and I read through it, and it keeps saying index. The heat index was 140 or 150, the index. And then I look, and it was only 108 degrees. It was 108 degrees. And they basically convinced people that they were dead because you'd be dead at 150 degrees. And then they do it again. You look through here, 113, 144, index. It's an index, right? So it feels hotter than it actually is, though. But it's not really that hot. And like here in New Mexico, they're telling me, the records are being smashed. It's so hot. And the day was like 95 degrees, which is a total normal temperature for this region. And nighttime was 63 degrees, which is, that's more than 30-degree temperature change. But what they're not talking about is anything that you could actually, worry about. They're not talking about how much chemicals are in everything. Not really. And I've been talking about that for years. And then now I start to see these articles finally coming out. Oh, there's forever chemicals and everything. But even then, still, they're not talking about like the waste that they dump in the earth, including all of their green projects, right? That are the most toxic projects and systems really on the planet. They don't talk about that. They don't talk about deforestation at the levels or in the areas that it's actually happening. But they will make you try to feel bad because there's too much carbon in the air, right? Even that paper that I was, citing was talking about all of that stuff. And then at the very bottom, it says something about, we still have time to save, because that magnetic reversal will be so much worse if we have a bunch of carbon in the atmosphere from global warming and man-made climate change. And I'm sitting there laughing because even in the article, it talks about how carbon dioxide, oxygen, all of the other things that make up our air refract and, block us from a lot of that. So even if the magnetic field was gone, you would want an atmosphere that was thick with a lot of carbon dioxide to survive it. And that I sent you another paper that's, linking basically the ozone's just gone. It's gone for a period of time. So you imagine actually frying outside. You're not going to worry about the heat index. You're going to worry about the cancer level, right? And then what happens if humans actually live through that? Do we get to see speciation and mutation of all kinds? Because, it's hard to take any of these.
Well, it depends. I would say it would depend how quickly that would manifest, that speciation. Is it an instant thing like Robert Felix used to talk about?
Right. It would have to be. It would have to be a few hundred years, like in evolutionary terms, is literally nothing. So it'd be like just several generations. The ones that had the right mutation, they're still around. Everybody else dead. And that looks like that's exactly what happened to us before. But it's weird that they have everybody worrying about things that don't matter. And you might actually worry about hurricanes coming in. That's a physical force of nature that can kill you, right? Are you really, going to worry about because it's hot outside? It's hot outside, and imagine that air conditioner has really barely been around. But now we're all, not everybody, of course. There's plenty of people that still just stay outside all day and they live through it. Those people are fine. They're healthy. If they're not eating those people probably grow food. That's why they're outside. And then you go through study after study that says, you'll live longer if you're around plants. You'll, eat better. There's less chemicals and everything. So like there really is no argument that the system is killing you. And the alternative is to revert back to a previous state of human. In other words, reboot and reset ourselves, right? Because new things are coming, whether we like it or not. That includes, so, you were talking about these hurricanes and cyclones. What do you think that would be like if there is no ozone layer, if there's really a thin or no magnetic field, right? I would imagine that would be horrible. Because we already know at that time through the tree rings and different stuff that they found, there was a lot of fire, a lot of lightning. We're talking electromagnetic stuff that people are going to remember. And it may literally be where we get these squatter men and all of these other things because you would have had massive amounts of aurora borealis at the time as well, right? Because you're going to have the magnetic field closer to the Earth and it's going to be bombarded with stuff. So people are going to see all of this in a new way that they didn't see it. And people forget that, yes, you can indeed live through one of these trippy times. And we know that because other humans already did. And one of those things is starvation. I don't think the crops would do too good, when they're bombarded with amounts of UV that they haven't experienced in thousands of years, right? So even if plants are changing during that time, we know we started agriculture, we started toying with the plants in ancient times, and here we are in modern times where we're changing it down to the cellular and the genetic level, like moving pieces of genetics, adding genetics and other things. So do they literally know something that we don't know? It makes you want to know, like, how many studies are there of plants and animals that the government or someone is doing in these extreme situations of heightened UV, little to no magnetic field and things like this. We really don't know as, the public, but they're more than happy to tell you that if you would just change over to a world government and pay carbon taxes and, really be responsible for your footprint, that they can fix it for you, even though everything that they've said in decades verifiably and easily found out is all lies. The ocean is at the same level, right? The only thing we do know is that lightning is definitely increasing, and that goes along with the situation that we're talking about 42,000 years ago. That's the exact same thing that happened then, is electromagnetic activity on the Earth increased a lot. So how do you have, townships and cities and elaborate old school copper-based networks? Well, the answer is you can't have that. It has to be torn down. And then we get into some of those other topics that we've talked about, like the cable companies. They're hauling in all their copper and stuff. They have billions of dollars worth of the stuff that they put out there, and now they're pulling it all back up. Now, why is that? Because we're switching over to different technologies, right? Wireless, Li-Fi, other things that probably could work in new scenarios. But they're letting AI kind of control this, and I wanted to bring this up. This is the AI's weak spot, and this is the human's ultimate superpower, and how we get out of any problem, how we save the republic, how we save ourselves, how we save the local, food that people will be eating in case we were in a scenario as a nation we needed it to. This article talks about the problem, the model collapse of how AI gets to a peak. And I've theorized this on the show and said it many times, but here's an article talking about exactly that AI has almost run its course, because after it gathered all the human information, it could only mix it in so many ways. So its models start collapsing where it has no imagination, it has no creativity whatsoever. The problem with this is that there are parties and entities actively trying to mix the technology with the biology, i.e., us, directly, so that they won't have this problem anymore. But without human beings' imagination and without our quantum computer, so to speak, the AI has hit a platform. It's becoming dead. It can't create. It can't invent. It has no soul. So the answer is to give it a soul. And, I've covered everything on my show and also talked about it with you, from them literally putting brains inside of computers and having it work. So they're going in that direction, which is the reverse of a cyborg, right? Instead of putting parts in human or beings, alive beings, they're putting parts of beings in the machine to make the machine better at, being what it is, which is an analytical machine that uses algorithms and predictions and calculations to come up with information. So now it's reversing. We're integrating the biology and the technology from two ends. We're putting it in us, and we're putting us into it. And that's the power we hold over the entire thing. Is without us, there is no technological transhuman revolution, because we are the fuel that fuels it. We literally are the programmers of it, and the test guinea pigs of it. I mean, the whole thing. That's what they're doing to us. But in the meanwhile, they're destroying everything that creates freedom. And the number one thing is food. Here's an article from Bloomberg. Cost of living crisis hits sales of everything from foods, cars to luxury goods. And what does that mean for a citizen? Well, luxury goods are those things that keep people occupied, so they don't lose their mind and go postal. Cars, we need those for work, to earn that money, to get those luxury goods and have that disposable incomes. But the center of it all is our fuel, the food, right? The food is the center of it all. And it looks like they're not slowing down in World War III. And really, we're in a pivotal point right now, because we don't even know who's running our republic. You've seen stuff on there. They're delegating powers in different directions. We're about to have one of the biggest bread and circus events in human history. It's called the U.S. election, while they select each side who they're going to pick and leave out the voter. And a lot of people forget this. Everybody's arguing about, worried about illegals voting. Well, you don't have to worry about that. They're not going to go cast a ballot in the, the popular vote that doesn't matter anyway. The way that works is they have new demographics in each city. From here on out, they'll have a new population and therefore a different amount of delegates, because they have more districts. And if a party is the one that runs that area and always wins the elections in it, well, then they run the entire thing. That's how that works. That's how they change the demographics. That's how they destroy the constitutional republic, by its own rules. That's part of its rules, so they can use that against it. And in the meantime, as the citizen, your food's going up. The power companies can't provide power because they don't upgrade or, do anything to their infrastructure that would, deal with the problems we're facing and we could face more of. So if we can't deal with the weather the way it is now, and you have all of these, powerful people asking for money to fix it, meanwhile, they give you options that on its face don't work and have already turned out to be BS. And they can't keep the regular power grid on. So how are you going to trust them, for infinity into the future as a world government with your future? And the answer is you can't. So we're at that pivotal point. Everything we can do right now is be a cog in all of these wheels of so-called progression that are steering us in the wrong direction. But if the government or the power company or both can't keep the power on in Texas, when they're known to have storms, tornadoes, hurricanes, heat waves, and every so often a drop in temperature. If you remember last year when we had that polar vortex stretch right into Texas, and I think even the year before that, right? They couldn't keep the power on, and there was no legitimate or obvious reason why they couldn't do that, except for the trend is to turn everything off. And recently I drove through all the fracking country where all the oil pumps and the natural gas wells and all that stuff. And most of it was off. It wasn't pumping. They weren't doing it. So you got to ask yourself, if everything is tumbling down in different directions in a bad direction, World War III, food crises, things like that, then why is it that everything is not being prepared for? But when you look at it, it's going in the opposite direction. And one example is that we have protests, we have crime, we have these other things, but they can't find the FBI don't worry about who did what. They can't stop people from doing anything, but they can stop people from selling their cheese.
We'll be right back after this short break.
This is the story of the worst road trip ever. In April of 1846, a man named James Fraser Reed, an Illinois businessman, eager to build a greater fortune in the rich land of California, leads 9 covered wagons out of Springfield, Illinois, on the 2,500-mile journey to California, in what would become one of the greatest tragedies in the history of westward migration. Reed found others seeking to find fortune, adventure, and new beginnings on this perilous trek across the West. Among them was the Donner family. Others like the Graves, Breens, Murphys, Eddies, McCutcheons, Kesebergs, and the Wolfingers would come too. The successful Reed was determined his family would not suffer on the long journey, as his wagon was an extravagant 2-story with a built-in iron stove, spring-cushioned seats, and bunks for sleeping, and 2 hired servants to help with the workload. Reed's 12-year-old Virginia dubbed it the Pioneer Palace Car. Also in the group were the families of George and Jacob Donner. George Donner was a successful 62-year-old farmer who had migrated 5 times before settling in Springfield, Illinois, along with his brother Jacob. Obviously adventurous, the brothers decided to make one last trip to California. At the bottom of Jacob Donner's saddlebag was a copy of Lansford Hastings's Emigrant's Guide, with its tantalizing talk of a faster route to the Garden of the Earth. It's tough, but the going's good. Tamsin Donner writes in her journal, "I could never have believed we could have traveled so far with so little difficulty. Indeed, if we do not experience anything worse, I shall say the trouble is all in getting started, but as leader of the wagon train, Tamsin's husband George Donner is aware there's one final obstacle to their journey, the Sierra Nevada, with peaks up to 14,000 feet. It's known if you fail to clear the mountain passes before the first snow falls, the repercussions and results can be both horrifying and deadly." As the Donner Party approaches Utah, George Donner makes a pivotal flaw in his decision to splinter off from the main party. Hastings Cutoff says it's a fine level road with plenty of water and grass, saving 400 miles. As it turns out, Donner's information is wrong. In fact, the so-called shortcut adds at least 100 miles to the journey. High in the Sierra Nevada, the Donner Party enters the Truckee Pass. They're only 30 miles from the California plains, but supplies are dangerously low, and traveling through the mountains is taking its toll, ending in a broken axle. The Donner Party stops to make repairs, but that night, 5 feet of snow falls. Soon the drifts are 60 feet deep. The Donner Party will be stranded for 5 months. In just 3 weeks, they've eaten all their food. Then they kill their pack animals. Next, they eat charred bones, twigs, bark, leaves, and dirt. Finally, a suggestion was made that were one to die, the rest might live. Cannibalism. On Christmas Day, 1846, a Christmas feast like few others takes place. They devour their first human. Bodies are cut up, flesh labeled so people don't eat their own kin. Later, 4 rescue parties bring out some survivors. The very last finds a man named Ludwig alone. Around him, a scene that haunts us today and will continue to leave a lasting mark in history. Ludwig is surrounded by bones and entrails, a 2-gallon kettle filled to the brim with human blood. Also nearby is George Donner's body, his skull split open, his brain removed. Tamsin Donner's body is never found. It also seems a man named William Foster shot 2 Miwok Native American guides named Louis and Salvador for food, which is the only instance of anyone in the Donner-Reed party that was murdered and eaten. The rest of the cannibalized were already dead. They took the survivors to Sutter's Fort, California, by the route that is now known as Donner Pass. Stranded in the early snows of the Sierra Nevada mountains, nearly half the travelers died of starvation and illness. Even today, Interstate 80 has to be closed occasionally due to heavy snows and blizzards. Only 45 of the original 81 members of the Donner Party survived. This truly was the worst road trip ever, which reminds us not to be complacent but instead be proactive with our prepping. We don't have to worry about not having food to last. We have My Patriot Supply. And right now, you can save $200 on a 3-month food kit with Adapt 2030. Adapt and stay prepared.
This across the planet. Maybe I have the number wrong, but it really seems like that many new songs were released per day across the world because everybody can make their own music in their own homes now. So it just doesn't have that mystique and that like remembrance of it because there's so much of it now that it's like a tidal wave of music also. Anyway, an off thought. Revolution Radio, thanks for letting us broadcast here tonight. And again, all the other platforms we are streaming on. Brighteon.com. Thanks for letting us also spread our message that overlaps in many different facet of our world, from economy to the climate, history itself. But if you consider any of these types of free speech platforms worth keeping on air, donation. And also, speaking of the website, we also, like before we went on the break, with Revolution Radio right at the top on the donate tab there, support free speech. But we will give you the show notes of what we were talking about in the previous hour of all those things we discussed. You know, even myself, I'm taking notes, listening to Ransom, and, you know, I'll summarize that at the end of the week. If you go to oilseedcrops.org and people go, oh, that's too much oil, like 1 barrel of oil, seed, like 1 seed you plant in the ground, and crops, plural, C-R-O-P-S, crops that we harvest every year. And remember, it's .org. .org. So it's oilseedcrops.org. You go there and you look down, MIAC, the Mini Ice Age Conversation, show notes. And we'll bullet point those for you. We'll give you like eight talking points or so. And you could share that with friends, family. You can, you know, print it off, take it with you. It's a conversation starter. You know, it's a good way for you to start some of your own research to try to, you know, dive even deeper into some of the topics we talk about, especially that South Atlantic anomaly and that whole magnetic field shifting and how that, you know, bends the cloud cells and jet streams. But more importantly, it affects on our planting and harvesting dates that have been very solid for the last couple hundred years. And by the way, we have been in a Goldilocks zone for about 200 years of you can plant this time and you can harvest this time, and you'll pretty much get the crop if you get it in the ground at the right time. Prior to that, this last 200 years is some of the most stable climate we've had in the last 12,000. So think about that for a second on the stability we enjoyed with a very high magnetic field back in, the 1950s. It was really strong. I think that was the largest solar cycle was at that point, 1957, 58, somewhere in there. And it's been declining since, but it literally dropped off a cliff. So if we've had 200 years of stable climate that allowed us to come to this civilization apex, and then if that goes out of kilter somehow, or it's not the standard any longer where, you know, seasons are jumbled on top or rainfall patterns are jumbled on top, or both of those are jumbled where it snows too early or it rains too early or it rains too late or whatever. There's 1,000 combinations you can put together. That would be highly susceptible to that type of change. If it's here, well, magnetic field could explain a lot of it. And again, my thing was like, how would that affect the human perception? Because when I look at cycles, you know, I look at cycles of time and I look at cycles of cooling and warming periods. I don't see the apex of a civilization. What I see is the rise and the fall on a regular cycle of a civilization. It's just a different way to look at it when you're looking at the data. Instead of saying, well, this civilization rose and then it fell, it's like, what was the climate cycle? What happened during that time? Rapid shift, wet shift, and you could see where these civilizations previously have begun. They arose because there were wonderful conditions for them to grow extra food as well, and then those conditions were taken away, and then they collapsed. But we just look back in history and go, oh, it was the rise and the fall of the Sumerians. It was the rise and the fall of the Mesopotamians. It was the rise and the fall of the early Han Chinese. It was the rise and the fall of the Aztecs, the rise and the fall of the Mayans, the rise and the fall of everywhere across the planet on this same bell curve. Like, why is that? What's the cause of that? It's not a civilization rises and then it falls. A civilization comes to greatness because they have extra calories. And when those calories are taken away, that civilization had reached its apex. And see, the thing I wanted to ask, Ransom, before you went on the break there, like, people don't, at what point does everybody understand that it doesn't work anymore? Like, the government and structure, and it worked because there was an agreed upon, at least agreement in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. You could feel it change around 2010 a little. But like, everybody understands the better term social construct or contract doesn't work anymore. Like, they've unanimously agreed on one thing, that the social contract don't work anymore. And this is not functional. And this is a fake out is what you have in front of me here. An enormous amount of people, like over 50%, actually are on board with seeing the fakeness of it all, like the illusion of it. And they no longer agree to play along with the illusion. See, that's what I think also there's somewhere in the middle of, is it the magnetic field change that allows the human perception to change to call BS on BS? I'm not sure. Or is it just a natural cycle where over time people just see it because over time it wears out after 80 years, 200 years, 250 years. And that's the max play time on it, because trying that for hundreds of times before, it never lasts more than 250 years because everybody sees through the illusion after that much time. Or is it the famines, or is it the solar cycles, or is it a combination of magnetic field changes, food shortages, and it just seems to overlap with the same cycles on the same time, and the awareness of people calling BS for their entire existence and what they see in front of them. I don't know, Ransom, that's too much. I don't know, maybe I rambled a bit on the intro, but welcome back for the second hour of Mini Ice Age Conversations.
Right. Well, it's obvious that they, have a super big agenda. I'm on Twitter and I see Tony, what's his name? Tony Heller's, he tweets so much stuff all day that's like no brainers, yet in reality, they're actually trying to push these ideas that he's easily I mean, just on that feed alone, there's many, many feeds actually like his, where people are just debunking everything they say almost daily. Right. And for someone that's not, I'm not sitting there doing all the research all the time on every little specific of things. And I try to understand things as a broader idea because there's just so many ideas out there. But to loop back to what I was talking about before, I like to listen to these futuristic ideas that elites, that, countries and think tanks and things like that. What are they saying? That's what I want to know, because I found that 9 times out of 10, if they say that's what's going to happen, it happens, right? So whether you were watching the news and, people said that somebody needs to do a certain thing, and then everybody got to watch it live, but it turned out not to be like I think they planned it, which is funny. Like, I was bringing that up also. You have these alphabet agencies that say they can't do this and they can't do that, and they're unable. I'm thinking, oh, well, you guys can't secure the border. Okay, I understand. You guys just can't figure it out. Yet, we can track every last wild horse that got away out in the wilderness, like way out in the desert, in the mountainous areas. They find them, they count them. There's too many of them. They'll kill them, right? They're able to do that somehow, even though, they can't figure out other things. So the FBI can't track threats to America, but they can track whether or not you're selling cheese, milk, or something. Like they show up, right? I don't know how they do that. So I believe them all at their word when
it's
they
the
say,
Matrix, dude. It's the Matrix. They're everywhere.
right. And when we were to get a little woo woo, because this is a period of time of 100 years we're talking about that might maybe happen, indicating like there's scientific papers about the last time it looked like this happened on the Earth as far as the magnetic field goes. So let's say it's inevitable, it is happening. What would you see futuristic plans and ideas be about? And I kind of alluded to that before. Maybe, I don't know, bunkers, planning to be in specific areas that might not be affected that much, closer to the poles, maybe.
Yeah, but how would they know that data? They would have seen several cycles also to know where those safe spots are. And you can't just see it twice and guess that.
Well, that's the thing.
Like you said, 52,000 years, you need to see it twice, right?
Yeah, well, that's the precession of the equinox. But the magnetic flip, I mean, they have data, like from tree rings and different things like that we found. So we know that certain things were happening. And, you can guess it might just turn around and go back the other way. That's the problem is even with the data they have on magnetic field reversal, it is a random at best, no cycle, or at least one we can't see. But we do know what it looks like when it's happening.
Ransom, hold on a second. What if it was categorized by all these ancient civilizations like the Mayans and the Aztecs and the Tolmecs and, Egyptian? I'll even leave a low hanger like the Egyptians, and everything was stolen, taken back, removed from all these sites all at the exact same time through the 17 and early 1800s and deposited in a single repository. They went through all of those codices and different writings, and they had translators, and they got the understanding because every one of those civilizations would have marked the cycles also. Now, if you consolidate all the consolidated marker writings and script, et cetera, all in one place, and you can study that, you can get a very, very clean idea of how many, maybe tens or hundreds of these cycles that these same elite have been through that try to maintain this power control. But you would definitely have to see this cycle multiple times to be able to guess on the planet where is going to be a safe time during this magnetic excursion. You'd have to go run like 100 iterations of that. So if it's every 400 years and it's been 100, then it's the same, there must be a different species going on under this planet or.
Well, I don't think that any other one was recorded by modern civilizations that I know of.
But the legends, man, the writings from those previous civilizations tell you exactly what happened.
It would have definitely formed the way the next iterations of civilization started thinking. And maybe that's why the megalithic builders were so much concentrating on quartzite and rocks like that, because maybe there was, a legends of some kind of effect. I mean, at this time we're talking, Neanderthals are walking around, humans are walking around, there's Denisovans walking around, there's Homo erectus probably still walking around. You got the Hobbit man, you have like 4 or 5 different unnamed ghost species that anthropology doesn't want to talk about. For whatever reason, they don't want to name it or talk about it. But there was all of these other humans on the planet, and they would have most likely already had speech and language. I wouldn't go so far as to say we can prove they had writing, but at least we can assume that they had speech because they were making cave paintings and they were, transferring ideas back and forth between each other. And there was also, evidence of interbreeding. We know that happened. So obviously they were talking and conveying stuff. But what I'm saying is if you knew, say from tree rings and geologic data, that an event looks just like another event, I mean, like exactly, would you not plan for that? And I think they would. And what would they come up with? Remember, we were talking about it, though. They would probably go to the, in their bunkers, caves, things like that. But not only that, the ocean. The ocean is the other place that you would be protected. And this might be a little woo-woo, but this article's about underwater towers, self-replicating cocoon hotels. Basically, what they're talking about is making skyscrapers, which they already have plans to do some, made out of coral-like materials. So they would be going under the ocean instead of building on top of it or something. and just building giant, areas like I'm showing the pictures here. They drain a massive amount of water and then start building the foundations and then let the water come back slowly, and boom, you have underwater skyscrapers. Now, if you were, the elite and you wanted to hide from whatever was on the surface, it's very doubtful that common man or peasants or people dealing with all of these, problems up on top are going to have the, logistics or technology to mess with you underwater or in your bunkers. It's almost a joke. You wouldn't be able to. You'd just be living on the land up top in some kind of agrarian society that has adapted to the new conditions. I mean, because that's the only way that would go down. But I was just bringing this up because everything I'm seeing is going in this direction of we'll live underwater. We'll live in bunkers. Everybody on the top, well, you can deal with the protests, fighting with the water. And here's another one. I don't know how this fits into it all, but for some reason in my weird brain, it seems like it does. Dark oxygen in the depths of the Pacific Ocean prompts new theories on life's origins. Right. And the reason they're saying that is because these little clumps of polymetallic noodles generate electricity like AA batteries. Right. Like little batteries on the ocean that have electricity. So imagine what these kinds of things that we're just now discovering would be doing with different electromagnetic situations on the Earth. We have no clue. But this is an example of stuff we didn't even really know about. And it possibly being the so to speak, the lightning or the spark that started life on Earth itself. Pretty out there. Not to mention a new fuel source. The dark oxygen on the seafloor.
Yeah, there'll be a premium for that. You'll have to pay to breathe. Remember that. So the entire ocean bottom could be covered in dark oxygen, and it would be so plentiful that it would outnumber oil by 100 to 1 in terms of the entire reserve on the whole planet. Yeah, you'll still have to pay for the first breath. If they can harvest it, they will. Absolutely. Because you're right when you said that statement there. If the elite or others see the signs of the cycle returning and starting again, wouldn't they want to prepare and get ready for that? Or us as well, wouldn't you want to prepare and get ready for that? Because I'm really having a difficult time to believe that all of these things are stacking up one on top of the other. As was anticipated, this massive distraction and interference wave or pattern of these huge giant events on one on top of the next, on top of the next, on top of the next. That's just in the last 2 weeks of news cycle. But then we had all the economic things go on where it's just food's getting noticeably expensive. Almost everything is. And then you got the whole societal transition of almost all small businesses no longer function. And it's only everything in, the corporate 500 controls, nothing else really left after that. So that you squeeze those 4 years together. And this whole thing with the squaring of the planets is coming up in a few more months. And now all of this new traction with proposed power outages, banking outages, and all these things occurring at the same time. Now, they've been preparing you for, the messaging's out there. So just let me walk you through a possible mind experiment. I'm just saying possible, could be, maybe. I'm just speaking out loud here. They've already, at this short juncture right here, just months before this possible magnetic field anomaly, excursion, difference, change, whatever you like to term it as, it'll be different, is at the end of October this year. Okay, we're coming into the end of July, the end of August, the end of September, and the end of October, which gives you 3 months, literally almost from today. It's actually the 23rd of October. So let's say 3 months from tonight's broadcast. Now, as we come into that, they've been broadcasting power out, banking out, power out. Would they know that this magnetic field is going to disturb electronics on the planet? They're using it as the perfect time to shut down the internet the best they can and then restart the system with CBDCs and everything else coming back on when the system comes back up. It's already in place and is substituted. It's been upgraded. It's been a forced push without your acknowledgement or permission. So think about this, think about a huge amount of internet and electricity goes down across the planet. And when it's turned back on days, weeks later, it's under an entirely new system that the whole system had been reset, where you'll have to get biometrics to get online. The new central bank digital currencies, because everything collapsed, there's no more dollars. So there's the new CBDCs issued with the FedNow wallet, but everything got already plugged in place. So don't worry, you still got money coming in. It's just going to be deposited directly in your account. Now think if they just reset the entire internet and the entire banking system during this power outage or combination power and internet outage, overlapping on that exact same time. It's coincidental that all these things are stacking, but now I'm absolutely saying like 3 months from now. So if this is the rate of intensity of, let's say, the fuzz moving forward, then by the time of 3 months from now, we'll have seen, 12 major more events. 12 major more events. So think about how big each one's gotten on top of the next and the next and the next. So let's go 12 more deep on that. The tides would change too. Think about that. The tides will be different coming in, not right this second, but I would encourage you, look how many stories of things related to water that are unusual, high tides, mud volcanoes, the thing we saw in Yellowstone with that blowout. Anything to do with water, and especially floods, rivers coming over their banks, locks ripping, these sort of things, bridges decoupling from the banks. All these types of things are electromagnetically connected. So the higher tides would be a gravitational thing. Now, even if our 4 planets squaring in the outer solar system had the combined gravitational effect of being in that certain configuration of just one extra moon, and that's it. That's all we get out of it. Well, what would that do for the tides several days or a week before the end of October? So what if your water comes rushing in at double the height, but also the speed would be different. And if it was triple the height, I mean, your water's moving really fast. You're going to get a lot of broken infrastructure along the coast. So think about those things in play and how the world would move to distract you at the same time. Now, if all that is in play and then everything goes down, you're going to be begging for a new system to come up. You won't care what it is as long as it turns back on. Like, we've grown up our whole lives depending on a system in order to have some comfort, in order to stay healthy and clean. We've been on this system for our whole lives, and we're used to it. Now, if you take out the electricity and you take out the internet, yeah, you're going to want that to come back on in whatever form. Okay, we got the internet reset, but almost 80% of all the websites from before and all the DNS and the host servers, providers, they're all gone. They're all locked up. We don't know what happened. So like 80-90% of the websites are totally gone. But we're going to reboot the internet, but the banking system collapsed too, but we're going to restart it under a whole new thing. Each different country or sets of countries is going to have its own interoperable pay system, and then we're going to issue coins off that, and everybody will have money, so they will have time for leisure. But you can't own anything because all the banks lost all the records too. So you can still stay in the same house, but you're just going to have to, pay rent or let other people live with you. But we'll turn the electric back on again. People will do anything at that point if the electric and the internet's been off for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month. What would you do to get that back into that system? You wouldn't care if it changed. You probably would gripe a little bit, but as long as you were getting free digits and your electricity's back on and the food came regular again, you probably wouldn't want to rock that system because you realize what it was like before without the system. But all the resets that would be implemented in there are the perfect cover excuse for the magnetic anomaly. Oh, it only happens once in 2,000 years. Oh, the tides got higher. The cables broke. But see how it could be a perfect cover to reset the system during that exact time. Because as I said in the beginning of the show, once this thing winds around, once the Earth comes out of that specific anomaly in April of 2025, we'll be out in front of the solar system by ourselves. So word to anybody listening, please look to the skies much more frequently. My call is far more meteorites, meteors, fireballs, shooting stars, whatever you like to call them, coming in from now. Well, not now, because we're going to be directly behind the sun in October. But as we come out of there, October, right around January of next year, you're going to start to see a lot more fireballs coming in the sky. And as we pull around out front of that, then you're going to see an enormous amount. So maybe that's where, it comes to having a dolmen would be handy. But I don't know, man. I don't know about those tricky dolmens on my property.
I don't know. I'm lucky. I live near the zone of silence in Mexico. That's supposed to be where all those rocks and rockets and all that stuff go to. When hopefully the nuke they fire at Holloman will fly off that way. No, it's inevitable for, we see it yearly, decade by decade, yearly by yearly. I mean, my whole life, natural disasters that seemingly would have been prevented as far as the loss of human life. Like maybe not stuff like Indonesia. You were talking about all that water. You remember when they had the Megan tsunami that rolled in? That was something that stuck in my mind because that's unlike any other kind of, disaster for people. You can't really do anything about it if you're still in the area when all of that debris and water just rushes over. I don't know if you remember that, but there was lots and lots of video of people, just swept up in it or going by in the debris, trying to climb on stuff on top of it while it's moving by. All the people hiding at the tops of the buildings, hoping the foundations don't come out of underneath them. And that's why I live in the high desert, man, because ain't none of that happening here. The only thing I really have to worry about is long, severe droughts, monsoon flooding, flash flooding. And then you think about that, and it kind of tells you that if you get certain circumstances on the earth, like maybe the worst year to be alive back in the past, it didn't matter where you were at on the globe. There was hard times going, and there were empires collapsing. They were totally collapsing. And within 100 years, you see new empires forming out of the remnants of the old one. And I don't think that our time would be any different from that, which means that if they're willing to let the United States and other systems go, which I think they are, it's quite evident that that's the goal here, then they have a real shot at having total and utter global control of everyone everywhere. And they've proven to us that they do have the technology to completely track and trace every last human on the planet and even the animals on the planet. And that's kind of what my point was with the border, not having nothing to do with the political argument or philosophical thoughts about having a border or not having a border. It's just the simple idea that your government leads you to believe things that are not true. We totally have the capability of keeping track of every single person that goes across. Matter of fact, I think this morning Mexico's bragging because the Border Patrol of the United States caught like the only drug kingpin to ever get away with, I think his name is El Mayo or whatever. But he's been, avoiding them all this time, and he's never been busted. But all of a sudden, he got caught on the border of the United States, of all places.
That's impossible, man.
Well, it's laughable because there are large amounts of people coming through that don't get stopped at all.
That's what I'm saying. Laughable is a good word. That's ridiculous. Like fake ridiculous, like comedy skit kind of ridiculous.
Well, I have no doubt that they are watching and keeping track of all the people that come by. The question is why or why not are they stopping them or, doing whatever, because that's not the agenda that they have. And if they can keep track of all the wild horses, running around out there just doing their thing, you think they can't keep track of you and where you go, which puts a new perspective on how will it unfold if society collapses. Which side do you think the government is on? Your side or, some other political side? Are they bought out by foreign nationals. You have no idea how the factions will play out. All we do know is that the financial system seemed to be on an imagination ride to the peak for their inevitable crash. And, I'm not an economic expert, but when I read, tons of them talking about the bubble, the bubble, the bubble, the bubble will pop, I know historically other bubbles did pop. So when elites are talking about basically crushing nations and coming up with new ways to be a nation, then I know that they mean it. And if I hear them saying that they want to depopulate the world, well, I think that they mean it. I don't think that they're Freudian slips. I don't think that they're accidents. So when, you got that guy talking about they're going to get under our skin, that there is no free will, and they need to know what's happening inside of us, and he meant that in every way possible, meaning in your head, what your thoughts are, but not only that, your health, your lifespan, all of that, what you've been eating. Can you imagine that if right now federal agents will come and stop you from selling organic cheese or raw milk to another human being when it's known to be some of the most healthy thing on the planet? And matter of fact, a majority of Europe has a long genetic history of consuming it. That they won't in the future, maybe, I don't know, see what's inside your body and find out you've been eating things that they didn't produce or that aren't legal. Like, where did you get those fresh asparagus stalks? Where did you get that wonderful cheese that you ate that's in your system? Because when you went to the doctor and they said, oh, well, you've been eating organic foods. I'm going to have to report that to the government. I know that sounds kind of silly, but isn't it basically the same thing that they're doing now by trying to control the food, micromanage the food? And the enemy seems to be for Americans, American farmers, American families to be able to help support each other. In other words, they don't like the idea of a functioning economy that is completely free market, working without them controlling it. And they're not going to let that happen. And it makes you wonder why they attack the most wholesome things. It's because they want you to eat that garbage that's at the food collection sites, and they want you to not work, not be able to own your property. They want you on the digital soup kitchen, because at that point you are completely controlled. And that's what we're teetering on the balance here in the U.S. We're coming up to a massively elderly population of taxpayers. We have a lot of new people that are not going to be paying tax. You have a lot of people that are on the system already that don't pay tax. And it's going to get to a point where for every worker that pays tax, there is someone drawing and collecting some kind of benefit. And obviously that's not a sustainable system and will collapse. But all those people on the digital welfare system or the digital soup kitchen, they are going to capitulate, I guess is the right answer, or conform to whatever edicts or dictates that the government gives them.
Yeah, well, again, it's all believability, really. The edicts that are believed or not believed is all from the believability of the presenter to the masses that this should be believed. And people can say yes or no, because enough people just don't comply, or enough people say no, then it just magically disappears. Have you noticed that? Like everything in history is like that. But how much would you need to bend a person's arm to get them to accept a new system? Because if you try to do it right now, everybody would say blatantly, absolutely 0% chance, no, I am not going to switch systems. But if they're forced to, or other events make the change, really, how much can you change a human being before they would snap psychologically? Because that's a hard thing for people to understand. What Ransom's been talking about here, and myself too, is that if the system were to go down on purpose, they've been talking about a banking reset for some time. There's been a lot of new legislation for bail-ins and real estate bail-ins, property bail-in, or savings and that kind of bail-ins, safe deposit boxes. If people were to lose that and be forced to go to a new system, Like that enough would be damaged, because you think about all the time and effort you put in to save into that old system, those things called dollars, or that stuff called real estate, or those things called stocks, those things called bonds or art or whatever it is. Those values would be ripped out. They wouldn't mean anything any longer. So that new system on digits, where everybody would be reset down to the same number of digits, maybe it's 2,500 a month. That's all you get. Even if you'd have to be extremely wealthy, above 10 million to even think about getting some of the perks that would keep you in that old system to hold your wealth. But anything below that, you just get reset. They would take everything. All systems would go to zero, and it would be reissued, of course, but then everybody gets the exact same. Equitable, isn't it? But how much do you think it would damage the psyche going that direction? Without broadcasting first what is going to happen. Because all these resetting cycles that we see, and I'm going to be on with Mike Adams tomorrow. We're doing a documentary, and he was asking me, all right, the economy, I got other experts coming on to talk about the economy and thing, but how do you wrap what you're talking about with the celestial events into the economy on the planet here? And it's just simply following the disturbances, which Ransom really well spoke about in the first hour. That's why you should get our show notes, oilseedcrops.org. But that cycle that comes in, the intensification of it from the present. So the Arctic roots are something that's being talked about with the BRICS too. Like, we're talking about going completely different systems here. We're talking about having their own Arctic trade routes that have this nuclear icebreaker fleets running, so they can have the northern route between China and Russia completely open all the time, outside any U.S. military presence at all. But then, the whole different undersea cable system that China's putting out right now, it makes me wonder, like, why is China also putting out new cable system across their BRICS-aligned nations, nothing coming out the West? It's all consolidated along maritime string of pearls, and also what you understand as Shanghai Cooperation Organization and those others within the BRICS that are communally sharing each other's currencies, like M-Bridge, which is China, United Arab Emirates, Thailand, and Saudi Arabia. I mean, they're tying everything in under a new, completely outside control transportation system, communication systems, banking, and trade, like gold equals something else. I mean, is that it? Are they setting all that up there because they know everything out on this side of the planet is going to get greatly affected? Because you need to think about all these changes coming in here, the massive amount of X flares we've had. Since the beginning of the year, I would encourage you to look at the incredible activity. Remember the news reports for like at least 2 of the last weeks since the beginning of the year have been completely focused around solar activity. Remember the biggest solar storm about a month ago? We got the noctilucent clouds behaving strangely. Those are the high altitude clouds that are usually seen in the coldest months of the year, but they're seen now in our summer. It's the opposite season to see these at such intensity. I don't know. It's the rise and fall of civilizations. Think about the decentralization aspect of this too, because we just saw a massive computer failure across the planet because it's too centralized. And they want you to go to that type of even more centralized system with central bank digital currency. Like I say, we need to decentralize everything out at the same time. There's so many events happening in unison here that if it's almost like you need to blend all of the climate stuff together with all of the economics at the same time and sandwich these 2 giant areas of study. But I mean, really, who has that much time to chase down 50 extreme articles a day in different languages across different weather bureaus and different news media across all nations on the planet, scoured like with AI to translate it so you could, like, how many record lows, record high, record floods are there really going on across the planet that aren't being seen by everybody? Like a consolidation of all that information that would be your absolute no, the trigger point of when it was normal, and now it's off a cliff. But at the same time, with all the new economy coming out too, from all the Green Deal coming up, the copper shortages involved in that, everybody's talking about decentralization, crypto, moving to this, lightning speed that. I got to, who was it? Ursula, I forget her name, the EU friendly grandma lady who's a central banker. She was saying that they want to start a digital registry of all assets of all European citizens and put them in a digital registry, of course, to stop money laundering. And I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? You want to register all assets on a digital database so they know everybody's assets. And that was the whole thing. They want to digitize all the assets. And so this is the thing when we're moving forward in a step in time. We see the cycles are in play. But see, they want to reset the whole system to a thing that's really unthinkable as we imagine it here. So there's something called a real world asset, and I've dug into these further, and now they have like nature assets also. Corporation control of a nature asset, a natural asset, where a corporation will buy like 1,000 acres as a put aside, and they control that land, and that's an asset that can be digitized and then fractionalized, and all these people can own different shares of the land. But those owners of the shares also get the carbon credits that go away with having the forest. But at the same time, nobody can sell that land, and it's completely unusable unless everybody sells back into that single pot, and then they can execute on that piece of real estate to somebody else. But otherwise, it's pretty much locked forever because nobody's going to agree to 100% to throw it all back in and say, yeah, let's sell it, because they're getting the carbon credits off of that from the forest carbon sequestration programs. Those are a real world asset that is being pushed by major Fortune 500 companies to own land across the planet and generate those fake carbon taxes from it. Now, that's just one play, but the other side of the thing is, after this failure comes, most real estate will be worthless for a period of time. The currencies will be worthless and they won't come back, many of them. But if they want to move over to the real world asset class where the EU just let the cat out of the bag. They want to know everything you have because they're going to put that on a blockchain database that you own that and there's this much value that it's worth this much. And then that contract, whoever holds it, can then sell it, issue it, let somebody fractionalize it. They could run out onto the derivatives market with it because it has a value behind it. Everything you own, and after the banking collapse, it's going to be everything that all the banks own that we used to own. Anything that has a note on it will be bailed in. There'll be an assigned value given to it. And then every single piece of property, every asset, every natural ecosystem will be cataloged, digitized with a smart contract behind it, assigned a value. And this is how they want to start the new world with the new system. Now that's just on the ownership of things. That, and then they want to come into the monies also. So think about what a twist that would be. And then you're going to get central bank digital currencies, and you'll have to operate this with an app that'll be tied to your social credit score. And if you say something that's ilk of the, whoa, sorry, dog barking here. So hold on, I got to, Ransom, jump in here for a second.
All right. I was going to pitch a sci-fi movie anyway. So the plot goes like this. The world's governments know something's going to happen. They're not going to tell us what it is, but we can kind of guess that involves the collapse of civilization. But I was thinking, the way that they portray everything. And here, and I'll put it on this article so everybody could see what I'm talking about. The big bubble, right? The big bubble that they keep talking about financially, the big bubble of all of these things. So this is an article that says the CrowdStrike global outage shows the serious dangers of a centralized digital world. And I agree. So what if the players of the world knew that everything was going to collapse, and therefore they would lose the way that they controlled things in the immediate terms. They would want to have scapegoat ideas. So if you wanted to reset everything and make sure you had to control, you could use an outside event that just turns everything off, and then you could tell everybody, well, it's because everything was tied up in the centralized digital world. In other words, if they didn't tie everything together, it wouldn't be so easy to collapse the entire thing. If you go back a few years to 2010 and just think about how separated all of the tech companies were, manufacturing, all of that has kind of streamlined into one entity that is going, full steam ahead to the future. And I think that's the main thing that they're trying to do, is if they could get everything centralized worldwide, even into two different blocks of financial world, like say the BRICS, and over here we got the dollar. If you could even just get all of that centralized on each block, then if you had a worldwide event, you could not do anything, because they would just say, hey, we told you, and you know what? It's your fault because you guys wouldn't let us, take your money for the global climate change, and therefore it's your fault. So now you're going to have to give over all of your human rights, all of your supposed civil rights, and all of your rights of whatever country. You got to give that up now so that we could save the planet, because you didn't listen to us, and look what happened. Everything collapsed. It was all centralized, and you guys wouldn't let us protect you. That seems like like a sci-fi movie that's going on, is that everybody in the world was in cahoots to centralize everything into one government, so that each event, or every event, therefore, after that, the world government would have control over all peoples in all areas for their own
wait,
good.
Ransom, wait a second. What if it's all monies, all gold, and all silver as a repository pickup spot for the Anunnaki coming back in and claiming their treasure on the planet they own?
Well, yeah, I was being silly, but really what I'm talking about is, look how easy it is for them to centralize everything. And then if anything happens, cyber attack, maybe you could go ahead out on a limb, a solar flare. Oh, it's not our fault. You can't blame us specifically that we transferred all of your wealth and you don't have it anymore. So we have to start with the new system from scratch. Because everybody's money is what? It's not real. It's either digital or it's in paper fiat. And if they're not, they don't have any real assets. And even when you do, once a government collapse happened, how are you going to hold on to those physical assets? So, it's a big idea. But I think it's the big club that we're not in. And this is that fundamental transformation of wealth that one of our presidents recently talked about. You're seeing it right with your own eyes, and that's what's going down. It's going down with the property too. Property, like land that's owned by people, it's going to increasingly and exponentially disappear out of the hands of private ownership. If their government doesn't go full Marxist, then they will use capitalism against them and buy it all up.
Or come in and raise the prices so high that the property taxes went from $800 to $5,000. And then if you have that many acres, these little tricks that they try to play. Oh, everything's more expensive. Your water bill's up, your electric bill's up. Oh, the new co-op added this much new generation with all the new people moving in. No, you got to pay for the new ROI on the project there. Thanks. So, everybody's seen this in areas that were formerly countryside areas, very affordable. But now, the big investment companies come in. Oh, I saw also one where they were coming in to buy whole neighborhoods and just bulldozing them and putting up data centers, because the paved roads and the electrical connectivity was already there, and the ROI on just buying the houses, because they were under market anyway. So think about, you got a neighborhood of, say, 50 homes, and what's on the screen?
No, I was trying to tell you, I put the article you sent me up on the screen. Sorry.
Oh, right on. You mean the impact of September 2019 Antarctic sudden stratospheric warming on mid-latitude report?
Yes.
Well, I was kind of diving into that, And, we were talking about magnetic anomalies and things. So what they're saying here is the total electron count has that surge from Antarctica to the Arctic or the Northern Hemisphere through the stratosphere and the mesosphere is electric. And they're measuring it in total electron count, increases or decreases. Now, the sudden Antarctic stratospheric anomaly is super rare. It's only happened a couple of previous times. Like, it hardly ever happened. This is only the third time since the 1800s that it's happened. So they have some measurements from the last time. And 2019, so this is a strange thing. They had never measured it before, and then there's one in 2019, and here's another in 2024, and the first year, I believe, was 2013. So I'm looking at the if you go down to where it says altitude in kilometers and then the latitude, a little bit down there, it shows you the blues. This is the wind anomaly, okay? So you're going to measure how much faster or how much slower the wind is going to go in our winter time here in the Northern Hemisphere based on what is happening with the Antarctic really cold air mass getting blasted out of the way, and like this heat arrow going right through the middle and splitting it in two pieces and having it roll really far north into the southern hemisphere off of Antarctica. Now, that kind of energetic push and interaction and disruption in some ways transfers electrically through the mesosphere and the stratosphere to connect. Again, it's got a magnetic field line in the northern hemisphere that connects from the southern. So what we're looking at is the wind speed here. So anywhere 30 degrees to maybe 50 degrees in the northern hemisphere, the north latitude, is going to have slowed down winds. So think about that, like slower wind, what would that create as a way for a vortex to fall into that, void or that, barren or empty space? Things are going to move slower. So that's on the wind anomaly. That's those first 6 images there. And yeah, so what they're trying to say is there are going to be definitely some changes coming in for the wind speeds, and the storms should collapse more ferociously in those areas on top of each other. And then if you go down to the one that's like those, I don't know, looks like a half moon or a shape that's kind of like a cone that's unwound. That's a total electron count change in percentages. So remember, electricity is like your light bulb. The more electricity goes into the system, the faster it vibrates, the brighter the light gets, means more heat. When you turn it down and it gets dimmer, it gets blue, it gets the cooler. So over the total electron change percentage here, looks like Europe's going to take the brunt of the cooling this winter based on the previous Antarctic stratospheric warming event. So that'll give you some good indication there of these cycles are in play. Now, how are these going to dovetail on top of all of the changes coming into October? Because these same changes that they're referencing are August 15th, September 15th, October 15th. So we're going to have an electrical difference, not a disruption, but a difference in electron charge coming through the mesosphere and the stratosphere at the exact same time that we're getting into this planetary squaring in the outer solar system. So there's something very unique that all these cycles are overlapping, and the strangeness of the frequency of the cycle, like never seen before or only seen a couple times in history in the past, suddenly just appear all at the same time. Like all of the massive amounts of, just suddenly. Too many to really keep count of. There's too many records being broken on every possible way to measure something in the atmosphere that are being broken that it's really difficult to keep up, because it's the next one, but it's not a little bit more. It's double or triple the biggest one they've ever had in the last 150 years. It's getting to be the absurd point. And then, this article coming in here talking about electrotransference. At the same time, there's going to be electromagnetic strangeness. So buckle up, folks, as I've heard it say. We're going to need to think about, getting some of our preps in order. And I would say with the electrical outage here this last week and the perceived computer outages, which would affect electrical production too, I did just do a survey of it. Do you have a generator? Do you have enough extension cords? Just like focus on one thing. If the power goes out, what's the first thing you're going to go for?
My flashlight, because, it's been going out nonstop where I live because of the monsoon storms blowing through. Poor Ruidoso. I don't know if you saw the fires there that devastated the town. It's the town right next to mine up in the mountains. But they had severe fires, and then they had severe floods because the fires burned out everything that would hold down the soil and the water, and it's just ugly. And they've, just the other night, again, they were all having to get up and leave their house, leave everything, and try to escape down the mountain, while their livelihood and their homes and their properties were just being washed away. And I guarantee you, none of them thought that could happen to them just 3 weeks ago before it happened, proving that no matter where you live, things can change, and when they change, they happen in a hurry. It's like overnight. Just like kind of we've been talking about as far as the whole world, it can happen in your own personal world.
So get ready. And as always, if you want to subscribe for our show notes, that's oilseedcrops.org. In that nav bar, hit MIAC show notes, and we'll send them off bullet points so you can start the conversation with friends and family. Thanks for listening. See you next week, my friend.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio.
What the heck is the truth, G?
If you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
Su cabeza era el blanco, darle muerte al objetivo. Quién sabe por qué razón a Trump no lo quieren vivo, pero sucedió un milagro, porque les falló aquel tiro. La gente muy asustada pensaron que había muerto, y entre medio de los gritos se escucharon otros tiros. Los agentes dieron muerte. De inmediato aquel bandido, con la sangre